There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and tag video. I always do the midlife, no, that's another tag. The mid-year book freakout tag. I've done it 6 years running, but I didn't like the questions. They didn't really resonate with the kind of reading year I've had so far, and I just happened upon a new tag called the 6 Down, 6 to Go. 6 months down, 6 months to go tag. It's originally an original tag by Melinda over at A Web of Stories, and I like those questions much better. Some of them are almost exactly the same. Some of them put a different spin on the similar themes, but I thought I'm gonna do that this year. So, without further ado, here we go. It has one question that I don't like on the other tag, and I don't like it here just because of my own personal idiosyncrasies. Number 1, how many books have you read so far this year? Do you have a yearly reading goal? If so, how are you doing with it? I don't disclose my reading numbers. I didn't disclose them when I read an astronomical amount of books compared to most big readers, and I don't disclose it now that I'm reading a lot less than any big reader. I just don't think that it's a good idea to talk about how many books we've read. I think it's just a bad idea. So no, I don't talk about how many books I've read. I've read about the same amount as I read last year, and last year was a very stressful year. This year is not. This year there's been a lot of good things happening that have taken my time. Last year, more negative things. But I'm reading less and having an astoundingly good year so far with my reading. And I don't set reading goals. 2, what have been your most read genres during the year? Well, this one is funny for me because all I read is literary fiction with a little bit of nonfiction, just a smattering of nonfiction thrown in for good measure. I always joke that if I like the fictional text, it's automatically literary fiction because I read a little bit more widely than that. I don't remember having read any commercial fiction this year, and I generally poo-poo the genre, but I do read in this year more than recent years, women's fiction from the mid-20th century, and I think most of that could be called literary fiction, but some of it definitely, that you could make a case that it's genre fiction. But no, because Sean likes it, it is literary fiction. 3, have you noticed any changes in your reading? This year, very much, and that's because after a 3-year separation solely for immigration-related issues and other stuff going on with my husband in Japan, he joined me at the end of April, and I also moved into a new house at the beginning of April, and so there was a lot of busyness with that meant that I couldn't read as much as I naturally would. But what I also noticed is that as soon as he got here, and because he had jet lag so bad that he slept all day, my emotional balance, and I'm not going to get too navel-gazing about this, but it's a really real thing that I've noticed this year. My husband was back. I was blissing out. I was so happy. I didn't realize how bent out of shape I'd become, and it had affected my reading. Well, during the first month he was here, where he just slept, I just immersed myself in reading in the way that I remember being immersed in reading during the halcyon days in Tokyo. And then, after he recovered from jet lag, then he needed a lot of things from me to get this identity card and that and this and that and apply for jobs, and that took a lot of time. And so then, even though I wanted to read more, because I felt so happy and grounded, I didn't have the time. And so my reading took a back seat, and now he's got a job and got all these other identities, Canadian identities and relevant ID cards in place. I'm now at a place again where I just want to read to my heart's content. And my husband sits beside me playing his computer games or doing whatever he likes to do, because we don't have that. We definitely don't have reading in common, and there is just no issue about us being immersed in what it is we like doing side by side. I've really noticed that this year. Number 4, do you have any projects in progress? And one of the reasons I like this question and this tag is because I haven't had a whole bunch of new subscribers recently, but I have over the last year or so. I've had a bunch of new subscribers that I probably haven't gone back and watched the early videos when I was young and svelte and in Japan. It's worth covering some ground again and introducing myself in that way. So I've got a bunch of projects on the go. I hope I can remember them all. One is the novella reading project with the Calgary novelist Barb Howard, a good friend of this channel and somebody who's been a guest many times, including this is our 3rd year doing the novella project. And it's because Barb Howard herself is a novellaist. She has written one novella, Happy Sands, which I loved so much. I read it twice in 1 year. And that she's we're both interested in like the genre of a novella. What makes a novella different from a short novel and a short story, other than obviously the page length or the word count. And so this is our third year running where we assign each other novellas and then come back 6 or 8 months later and discuss them. So that is one project I have in progress, and I'll link to that part 1 of the 2025 project in the show notes. I also, in homage to Mikiko, another friend of this channel, frequent guest, she perused or watched videos where I talked about my top reads of all time, and she read a bunch of them, and so she did that project a couple of years ago, and then I wanted to return the favor, and I went through her Goodreads, and so I am very slowly, I'm just starting working on the very first one, even though we did the part 1 video months ago, but I'm really enjoying that one novel, and I'm at my own pace. I said there's no promises about when I'm going to finish, but I'm going to have a whale of a good time doing it. So I'm reading some of Mikiko's top reads, and we're going to meet and talk about them when I'm finished. That's a second project. Do I have any other projects? I guess I'll talk about the fact that I read out loud to 2 wonderful, very important women in my life. One is my mom, and the other is my cousin Mary Jean, who is a big reader. Every night or every day I read a chapter of books, different books. I don't read one book to both of them, both because they prefer different reading speeds and they like somewhat different books. There's an overlap, but their tastes do diverge. And so I've been reading to Mary Jean for I think a year and a half at least. I don't remember when I started doing that. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And now I'm reading to Mum as well. And because Mum tends to do better with women's fiction mid-20th century that's more kind of like romantic or comic, not exclusively, and I like that kind of fiction very much too. I've got a lot more of that into my reading diet, into my reading life. Mary Jean prefers more literary stuff and perhaps more contemporary stuff, although again, not exclusively. That's, I guess, a project. That's a solid hour a day that I'm reading to 2 wonderful women who I love very dearly and really enjoy that. So if you want to call that a project, that's another one. And maybe that's enough for this question. Number 5, have you discovered any new authors, new or new to you? I have. I've discovered many new to me writers or new writers by their debut novel, and they haven't had any other novels out, so I'm not going to include them in my answer. I'm going to include one writer who's got about 4 novels in their backlist that I want to get to, and that is the Canadian novelist and poet Nina Berkhout. I'm going to be talking about the book of hers that I read, This Bright Dust, in answer to an upcoming question, but she would be one where, oh my, there's all this backlist that I can't wait to read, so that will be my answer for this question. And I think I even want to read her poetry, because the novel, This Bright Dust, had poetic epigraphs, which she herself created, that the male protagonist wrote. He was a closet poet. And so, of course, she created those, and I thought, oh, her poetry's gorgeous, too. I gotta read her poetry. If I don't read anybody else's poetry, I gotta read Nina Berkhout's poetry. Have you had any standout books? And this is the main reason why I rejected the questions for the Midyear Book Freakout tag, because their question there is, what is it, your best read of the year, or your top read so far? And I was having anxiety attacks about picking one, and I know I'm gonna have the same dilemma at the end of the year. Because all of these, I think there's 6, but I can't count that high. So I'll talk about the 6 that I just love with all my heart and that have really deeply affected me. In no particular order, I'm just going to pick them off the stack here because I've loved them all really quite equally. Is this Saskatchewan novel, Small Reckonings, by Karin Melberg Schwier. I have a full interview with Karin about this novel in the pipeline. It'll be coming in the next month or 2. And this is a tragic novel with characters that are so indelibly drawn about a homesteading couple in the early 20th century in Saskatchewan. And the dad is from New Zealand originally, and he marries a woman in Toronto, brings her out west, and she has a backstory full of trauma, and she settles into the routine of a homesteading farming life, has a boy who she adores, and she feels like she's over all that trauma in her past. And then her second child is a daughter that's born with Down syndrome. I didn't pick that up specifically that it was Down syndrome, but certainly intellectually disabled. And that triggers the mother massively, and much more plot ensues and much more tragedy, but also lighter moments and true affection and really heavy themes explored with such perfect gentleness, gentle perfection. It really was an incredible novel that I can't stop thinking about. Trigger warning for sexual assault, I have to say anytime I mention it. Small Reckonings. This was a reread, and I loved it even more the second time, and I'm sure it was in my top reads of the year I first read it. The New Zealand novel, Loop Tracks by Sue Orr. And I'm hoping to interview the author about it this year. And Loop Tracks is also a heavy novel. It's very much of a Sharon book. Starts in 1978 when, briefly, abortion was banned in New Zealand, and this high school girl, her parents scrounged around for enough money to get her on a plane to Sydney so she could have an abortion. And then that story goes in an unusual place, and then we catch up with that girl, that teenage girl who's now in her, I think, late 50s, just before COVID broke out in New Zealand, and she has a grandson who is autistic, and she has issues from her past that are keeping her stuck in various ways, and she is one of the most incredible protagonists. I adored Charlie, that's her name, Charlie, so much, and I love the way she thinks and the way she loves words, and the way that this novel tackled some really tough social issues in a way that didn't feel info-dumpy, didn't feel overly done, just mwah! I don't ever feel like I can describe this novel very well. And for those of you that know me, know my channel well, it's the novels where I lose my words. Those are the ones that get the deepest inside me. I started the year reading, or finishing, I think I started it in December, it doesn't matter, Sean, with this short novel, The Old Haunts by Allan Radcliffe, a gay Scottish writer. This is his debut, and I just loved it with all my heart. It was very Michael Cunningham-esque, full of quiet moments about a grief-stricken young gay man with his fairly new boyfriend, and they go to another part of Scotland. I think they live in London, and they've just come back for Jamie's mother's funeral, and his father had died like 14 months before or something, and the boyfriend brings him to a rural, it's like a bed and breakfast, but that's not the word they use, place to help him get his bearings and just be, and just to recover a bit. And it's just really tender, gorgeous sentences. Again, small moments with this aura of grief and love and a new love, friendship, secondary characters that jump off the page and deserve their own novel. I have a full conversation with Allan Radcliffe about this, and his second novel's coming out later this year. This also was a deeply touching, fabulously literary novel. Actually, I think there's going to be 7 if I'm counting right. So let me talk about the 2 that I don't have. One I lent to my mom, and the other one I can't find in my house, but I know it's here somewhere. So I'll talk about those so I don't forget them. So the one that I have lent to mom is the one nonfiction on this list, and that is Sharon Butala's memoir, Where I Live Now, that I read just a couple months ago with Heidi of My Reading Life, and I loved her first memoir, The Perfection of the Morning, and I love this one just as well. And I think even as I get older, like I'm 2 years older than I was when I read the other one. They were published, I think Perfection in the Morning came out in the 90s, and Where I Live Now maybe in the early 2000s, or around 2010, I don't remember. But just the way she, in the deepest way possible, locates herself in the prairies, mostly in Saskatchewan, where she grew up and lived until she moved to Calgary after the death of her husband in the early 2000s. And the way she creates her identity as a writer and as a woman, and as a prairie woman, as a Western Canadian woman, and all the things about archaeology, history, Indigenous history, colonization, writing, and relationships, and not fitting in, and not wanting to fit in, but actually wanting to fit in, with such honesty. Again, not doing justice to it, but it packed a real whammy for me, and I'm now reading her forthcoming memoir that I'll have more to say about later, but that was incredible. And the Western Canadian novel that I've mentioned, This Bright Dust by Nina Berkhout, was another powerful novel set back in 1939. It's set in Alberta. Nina Berkhout grew up in Alberta. She lives in Ottawa, I believe, in Ontario. And this novel is set in a town that, for much of Western Canada by 1939, the Depression, the Dust Bowl, the terrible drought had left, but it's not everywhere. And this was one pocket in Alberta where the farmers were still losing their land, foreclosure, bankruptcy, because there was no crop because of the drought. And then the royal tour, King George VI and his consort, Queen Elizabeth, who later became the Queen Mum, came to Canada and were to pass on the railroad through this village. And the characters are so vibrant. These two farming families, the only one left in the one family is this farmer poet with a stutter. He's maybe 27 or 8 or something like that, and he's been in love with the woman across the road who has a child with not much of a story about who the father was, and her father, and they live there, and the woman and her 7 or 8-year-old boy are so excited about the royal tour, and I don't remember anybody's name. As soon as I put down the book, I forget the character's name, almost always, but the bachelor young man, the stuttering poet, he is quite lefty and thinks this is a travesty that they're spending money on a royal tour when people are don't have enough money for food. And so it explores Canadian identity, and in a way where that really resonates now with the way that the King came to Canada this year, and how that when Canadian identity was quite rocky, it still is. So there's just a lot of Canadian. It says, I think the title of my discussion with Nina was, "As Canadian a novel as can be, and as profound a novel as can be." Wonderful. So, quite a recent read, but also really impactful. Hope Never Knew Horizon by Douglas Bruton. I just wrapped this up quite recently, so I'll just say Douglas Bruton is a novelist who lives in the Scottish borders, and this novel has 3 timelines: 1891, 1850, 1880. The 1891 storyline starts on the coast of Ireland, Wexford County. Somebody discovers a blue whale, and that dead whale gets sold to the Natural History Museum, and then it's the story of those bones and all the things about whales that come out of it, and all the people who are touched or impacted by that whale, some in very spiritual ways, soulful ways. The other one, 1850, is set in the Emily Dickinson family, and Emily Dickinson is in love with her soon-to-be sister-in-law, and the love notes that are passed between them, and the narrator is the maid who accidentally, and then later less accidentally, starts reading these letters that are going back and forth. The third one, 1880, and this is a model and stage actress who becomes a model for a couple relatively famous, even today, painters, and it's especially this painting by, oh God, I can't remember, J.C. Watt or something, and it's the story of this painting which is called Hope, and all 3 narratives are about hope. Hope Never Knew Horizon, the line from a letter or a poem that Emily sent to her girlfriend, Susan. If you need a non-sentimental dash of literary hope, this is it. There's a conversation Lindy and I had with Douglas Bruton about this novel in my pipeline, again, in the next couple of months. This one was also just incredible. And again, these are in no particular order, but I love this novel so much. I read it over the course of a year. A debut novel from a writer from Northern Ontario, Making Up the Gods by Marion Agnew. And this is about a 60-something-year-old widow in a northern community. There's been a terrible car accident 6 or 8 months before, and she very reluctantly agrees to babysit the 9-year-old boy who lost his father and half-brother in that accident. And she's reluctant because she's a bit of a grump. She feels terrible about the tragedy, but her way of helping would be to bake a casserole or something. She's never had kids, and she's just not sure how it's going to go, but she does, on second thought, accept, and it's the story of those two, I would say, primarily, and there's a third character who I won't mention here, and I have a full, lovely chat with Marion Agnew about this one that touched me at the deepest part of my readerly soul, that I'll link in the show notes. I can't wait to see what Marion Agnew does next. All right, so that's why I didn't want to do the one about your top read. I can't decide. 7-way tie. 7. Have there been any disappointments? There's some books I didn't like that I didn't expect to like, but here's one that felt like a disappointment because it started out so good. It was a novel that had 2 parts, After Nora by Penelope Curtis, and she is a noted art historian. This is her first novel, and it's very autobiographical in terms of her own family. Very briefly, the first part is about her grandmother, who was an artist of some renown. If you Google her name, you don't find much on the internet, but she was fairly well known, and that first half was to die for. If you're interested in reading about art, and she was not particularly happily married and struggled to keep her artist identity in the, I think it was the 20s or whatever, with her second husband after a divorce. And then the second half just derailed for me. The second half is about the author, Penelope Curtis's father, who had an emotional affair with a colleague from Portugal. They were both scientists, but that was never, obviously if I say emotional affair, that means it was never consummated, but just it wasn't that interesting to read about. And then the author puts herself in the story after her father's died. She goes to Portugal for her own purposes and then strikes up a relationship with the emotional ex-lover or whatever. Didn't really hold my interest at all. And I read this one to Mum. We both agreed, but I still would recommend the novel to others because of that fabulous first half. So in a way, this was my most disappointing read. Number 8. Are there any books you would like to read in the second half of the year? There's lots I would, but here's one that I'll say. I haven't picked this up in about a year and a half, so it's time to pick it up again. And that is the 18th century novel, 1748, by Samuel Richardson, Clarissa. I think it's about 2,000 pages, I don't know. And I've been doing it mostly on audio. Again, I put it down, if you can use that phrasal verb to talk about an audiobook, about a year and a half ago. But I was having such a good time with it. Each of the 3 volumes on audiobook is 34 hours long, and I was getting started with volume 3. And again, just because of the year ahead in 2024, I just put it aside. So I want to not only pick that back up in the second half of 2025, but finish it, because I was loving it. A psychologically disturbing portrait of the place of the female protagonist in the 18th century who was manipulated and doing her best to break free of a dastardly man who was kidnapping her and lying to her and manipulating her, and her voice, her vulnerability and determination to figure out a way to get out from under his control. It's just so compelling. So I want to get back to it and finish it up. That's what I'll say for this question. 9. Do you have any other yearly goals you want to update? I went back and looked at my Besties and Worsties video, and I had 2 goals there. One was to get my current reads down to 6. I think that was the number, and I have failed miserably. But I think I'm okay with that. So the new goal would be to finish all the books that have been languishing there. I've picked up 2 recently, feeling this sense of serenity and ability to juggle more books again. I'm not going to let it go any higher. I think it's sitting at about 20 books, so that's a far cry from 6, Sean. So I'll reassess at the end of the year, but that would be a goal that I will update by saying I came into the year with 9 books. I've just checked, and I want to finish those by the end of the year, and maybe not replace them all with new stuff. To bring it down at least to 15 or something. I don't know. Anyway, so that's the update on that. And the other one was to get my buddy reading and reading commitments with other people under control, and I have failed miserably with that. And again, now that I'm feeling like I'm going to perhaps enjoy a really contented, immersive second half of the year, reading-wise, I think I'm okay with that. I had talked to Joe about reading short stories once we finish our current buddy read, starting in September maybe. Finish off the year just by reading short stories. We've got a bunch of short story collections we want to read, and I only do 1 short story every other week, and I might suggest something similar to Heidi, but I think that's all up for reconsideration now. So I talked to both of those buddy readers about that as the summer goes on. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I'm not going to tag anybody. It's getting close to the end of July, but it's still within the month of July, so anybody who's watching this that would like to do this tag, consider yourself tagged by me. Thank you for watching.